But without any more ado, I'll turn over to Mike. Thank you.
And welcome everybody to the fourth and final conversation on the post-Sendai priorities this afternoon. But it is by no means the least. And my own experience in recovery tells me that herein lie some of our greatest challenges, but also our greatest opportunities. And here to talk to us today, I have on my right, in order, Dr. David Johnston from the Joint Centre of Disaster Research, Dr. Sally Potter from GNS, Richard Woods, Head of Emergency Management Planning at Auckland Council, and Lisa Langer, a Senior Scientist with Scion. So, David, over to you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm just going to briefly talk about some of the work that we've been doing on understanding human behaviour to earthquakes and the implications for injury prevention and risk communication. Many of you, and I hope all of you, are going to, but many of you have signed up to the Shakeout event. And one of the questions we were asked is, what do we know about people's behaviour during earthquakes? And what can we learn from the experiences of the Canterbury earthquakes in terms of getting reduced injuries, and how do we communicate corrective actions to take during earthquake shaking? So one of the opportunities we have in New Zealand is to understand who was injured and how they were injured. And because of the way we organise our health system through the ACC and the district health boards, we have access to very good medical records about how people were injured and what their injuries were. So in total, there were about 9,500 injuries from both the September earthquake and the February earthquake in Christchurch. And if you look at the numbers there briefly, you'll see that there's about 2,500 injuries from the September earthquake, even though there was no loss of life and only 6 to 10 serious injuries, depending on how you classified them. We still had 2,500 people who sought medical attention. In the 22nd of February earthquake, it was slightly different. We had 185 fatalities, as we know. There were around 180, 200 major serious injuries, but we had 7,500 people who were still injured who sought medical treatment. Because of the payment system for medical treatment, everyone who presents at a GP to a hospital fills in the same form, and that gave us as researchers access to this database of over 9,500 cases. And what we were able to do, taking a non-medical look but looking at behavioural issues, is ask, can we tell something from this data about what people do in earthquakes? And what we found was one interesting fact, that there was actually a gender differential, and I can talk about that a little bit more. But what was more interesting, or what is interesting to me, was how we could separate injuries into both primary immediate injuries, as we classify them, things that injured people who were hurt by injuries, and injuries that were caused by people's actions during or immediately after the earthquake. And what we see is that the actual distribution of injuries is quite different from the two events. As you would suspect, those who were in bed at 4 a.m. in the morning were less likely to be injured by objects hitting them, or there were some injuries, about a quarter of them. But many of the injuries were sustained, we think, actually during or after the actual earthquake shaking, when people went to see people in their house or moved around or did some post-earthquake response. However, we see in the February event that the majority of injuries resulted from what we call primary immediate. They were caused by things hitting people. So what we're seeing is two different ways in which people are injured during earthquakes. And I'll come back to what that means for the messaging we give in a minute. We've also been wanting to look at what actually happened on the day. So there are a couple of ways we've been doing that. We've been surveying people's responses, so these are self-responding, about asking people actually what did you do during the time of earthquakes. We've also had a study looking at CCTV footage, and this is the work of Emily Lambie, a master's student from Canterbury, where we have analysed and developed a way of analysing the behaviour. So our aim is to look at every person from every frame, from every piece of footage we can get into Christchurch, to really give an understanding about what people actually do in earthquakes, and why is that important. So just in conclusion, in my limited time, I've got 50 seconds to go, we find that there were significant gender differences in injuries. Now, we originally thought that from the February data, that was just where people were at the time of the earthquake. However, if you compare the February earthquake, where we know it was uniformly spread across the population, being at 4 a.m, we still see the same ratio, about 70%, and we think it's more around accessing medical assistance and people seeking help afterwards. But in terms of future injury prevention, what we can say is that obviously in general, improved building codes, strengthening buildings, securing fittings will reduce future earthquake injuries and deaths. And however, even if we undertook those actions and we had safe buildings, what we see is the high rate of action injuries during and after earthquakes suggests that education is needed to promote appropriate actions during and after an earthquake. And in general sense that we find that injuries, deaths and serious injuries are mainly, and the reduction of them are about building safer buildings. However, with safe buildings, the behavioural responses are quite critical, and the behavioural responses account for most of the tail of the injuries we get. The vast number of minor injuries are nothing to do with objects hitting people, they are the actions that people take during and after. And that really highlights the importance of the shakeout exercise and the need for both engineering and behavioural education solutions for preventing future earthquake losses. Thank you.
Hello. My take-home message is that the Sendai framework is driving us towards delivering multi-hazard, risk-based warning systems. And I think we need to do research first to see whether this is actually appropriate for New Zealand. Priority 4 of the Sendai framework, which is on enhancing preparedness for an effective response, calls us to invest in, develop, maintain and strengthen people-centred, multi-hazard, multi-sectoral forecasting and early warning systems, and to develop such systems through a participatory process. So I think that one of our future priorities should be to use these participatory approaches to investigate indeed how suitable this would be for New Zealand. Some of my research at the moment is looking at this with Met Service to see whether an impact or risk-based warning system would be suitable for our stakeholders and the public for severe weather events. At the moment, Met Service issues warnings based on the severity of that weather, so it's very phenomena-based. Those warnings go to the media and public and also to CDM and regional councils as well as a lot of other stakeholders. Those stakeholders then issue their own warnings using the more localised weather information from that severe weather warning, as well as the hazards, impacts, and some response advice. One of the perceived challenges with this current model is that the significance of that severe weather warning may be a bit lost on the public. So if they receive a warning saying that there's 30 millimetres per hour of rainfall expected, they wouldn't know whether that's high or not. So the proposed model is to use this impact-based warning approach. This is where Met Service first asks the Civil Defence Emergency Management and regional councils and others what the potential impacts of that event might be. Those stakeholders then give that information to Met Service, who can then assess whether or not that event is going to exceed that impact threshold. And they can then give a warning using that impact information. So again, it goes to the media public and to the stakeholders, and the stakeholders then give out the usual warning, or it might be different, we have to see. So I'm using a participatory action research process at the moment to investigate whether our stakeholders think this is a good idea. So far I've run one workshop with New Zealand's hydrologists from regional councils, and I'm looking to continue this process with civil defence emergency management groups and maybe others. I'd also like to do a public survey to see what they think, because I suspect it might be different. I've also conducted interviews in the UK and in France with weather agencies there who have been using this approach for the last couple of years. Some of my preliminary findings have been that one of the benefits of this system is that the public does indeed understand these impact-based warnings more better. Another benefit would be that there is increased collaboration and communication between the scientific agency and with those stakeholders, and that's another action point in the Sendai framework. A couple of the challenges, and there have been quite a few that have been raised, is that initial conversation between the scientific agency and the stakeholders does delay the issuing of that warning. I was talking to a UK chief forecaster last week, and he was saying that delay may be between half an hour to a half a day for them. Another challenge that our hydrologists discussed was that perhaps it's a bit of a circular process if they're giving impact information to Met Service to receive it back again. This contrasts a bit with what some of the UK meteorologists have said, where they said their stakeholders actually supported this process, so this needs further investigation. That's the next one, but I'm just going to finish with saying I think it would be very interesting to apply my results once I'm finished across our different hazards to see whether we can have more of a unified multi-hazard approach in our warning systems, which would align us to the Sendai framework. Thanks.
I've just put up there at the top comprehensive disaster risk management, because I think we just need to be cognizant of the fact that while we're talking about readiness and response, they're all one, and priority 4 of the Sendai framework really encompasses all 4 R's in there, and it's my excuse if I digress from readiness and response as well. So I just really wanted to reflect on something that Basil Chamberlain said earlier in regards to gaps in knowledge, and essentially say, how can we be ready, or how can we do readiness if we don't know what we're going to be ready for? Prior to 2010, Auckland had never had a full regional assessment of seismic hazard, or tsunami hazard, or coastal inundation hazard. So over the last 4 years, Auckland has invested in identifying these hazards, and more importantly, identifying the risks associated with these hazards, so that we can feed into the readiness so that our communities can be more prepared. As well, at the same time, God, that clock's ticking down quickly, isn't it? At the same time, community response planning was established, a full program of work in 2010, and that was really intended to go identify members within the community that they could connect emergency services and local groups to establish a plan so that those groups in the community, or the community themselves, could respond to an emergency by themselves, either under our direction or spontaneously. That program of work, we now have 75% of the population covered in Auckland. Coastal areas were prioritised because they're perceived to be at a higher risk at the time. And now we've got some challenges which I'll just talk about on the next slide as well. There's a real balance here. There's been a lot of emphasis on community and societal connectivity and building individual preparedness today, but there has to be a balance with contingency planning as well. So while we've been working with communities and trying to build good response frameworks within the communities in Auckland, we've also been working on these large planning for large incidents. So we've recently developed the Auckland Evacuation Plan. And I think really, if you look at the things on the side here, we're talking about strong partnerships are fundamental to effective disaster risk reduction. And I mean, that really resonates with response as well. So our response documents in regards to the Auckland Evacuation Plan, which we've developed, really looks at the strategic framework of evacuation, how we're going to conduct that, and then through the readiness initiatives that we have in the Community Response Plan program, the communities can do more detailed planning with the risk information that we've provided with hazards also. So there's a real balance there. There's a few challenges, and I've just brought together this. You may disagree or you may agree, but to build resilience effectively, CDM needs to be embedded into the fabric of our city, and that's, in my opinion, a lot easier to do in the unitary authority space. We were all in one space. There are its challenges, as Jana mentioned there, with silos as well, but we really need to be looking across the spectrum of environments, the built, the social, the economic, the cultural, and what are the methodologies that we need to be putting in place to build resilience within the city. One of the big challenges that we've encountered with the Community Response Plan program is that our communities are not spatially constrained. They're extremely diverse, and so we've put a few initiatives within that program to develop community response plans with business associations. So the Greater East Tamaki Business Association, 2,500 members, they have a community response plan which links into each individual organisation's business continuity plan. In addition to that, we're now looking at how we can build ethnic-based community response plans, as people usually identify their community, they will identify with the community as what they choose, not necessarily their space or place. So we have a large proportion and diverse community in Auckland which don't necessarily identify their communities with just where they live. As I say, we have very diverse, mobile and dynamic communities within Auckland and metropolitan areas. That 75% that's covered by community response plans actually sits mostly outside of the metro area, and we have a high level contingency plan or community response plan at that contingency level, which is an agreed framework between stakeholders, the police and the like. Just to put that in perspective, over 24% of Auckland's community identify as Asian, and we have the largest Polynesian population in the world. So there's some real different dynamics within the city to be able to build resilience. Now, our key there is we need to really identify those touch points in the community, or those champions that can help lead us those initiatives. And I've probably already touched on that point, given I've got 10 or 11 seconds to go. What I really want to just convey now is that we are in a really, really unique space in Auckland. We're just going through the next evolution phase of our group plan review, and we're having a bit of a shift in focus to community engagement, and that's going to be the real key focus of our group plan going forward. That really offers collaboration. It's been a great theme here with the Sendai framework. So our collaboration with the ministry and the sector as a whole and the wider stakeholders, we're really committed to collaborating with everyone going forward with this group plan review. So I'm really excited about it, and I look forward to working with you all in the future.
Kia tātou. My focus is on wildfires in terms of risk awareness, prevention, preparedness, and the focus on communication to increase community readiness. So I won't cover response at all. We think about our communities in New Zealand. We don't actually experience a lot of massive fires, not in the form of fires, particularly in Australia and North America and other parts of the world, but we do have regular small fire events. But consequently, our communities are really more aware of the dangers of earthquakes, floods and other natural hazards, and on the whole are not particularly well prepared or aware of the wildfire risk. On top of this, we have the climate change of increasing fire risk to New Zealand. And what we see is that effective communication really is a key to minimising the number of human-caused fires in New Zealand, and hence the impacts the fires have on our communities. I have done a piece of research on effective communications, which I'd like to share with you, and it was part of a bushfire CRC study collaborating with RMIT in Melbourne. Our focus was on the less fire-prone environments that we have in New Zealand. We did 3 case studies and also interviewed our national key stakeholders. We really asked them in terms of their awareness of wildfires, their accessibility to information, and what they found to be effective. In a snapshot, generally we found that the awareness was not high, except in some areas of very high wildfire, that were very high wildfire-prone areas, but particularly focusing in our rural-urban interface. We certainly found, as we all know, that all our communities are different, and we really need to understand its diversity, so our communities were very different in our study. And really what we concluded was that the past of kind of one message fits all and a scattergun approach of communication was really not going to work. So really trying to focus on fire users and non-fire users and the different types of users and the messages that they required, whether it was awareness, some form of careful use of fire for fire users, and preparedness of wildfires. So in terms of gaps and the focus required, we certainly see a growing need of focus on the rural-urban interface and definitely the urban fringe of our larger larger urban areas. As those awarenesses are related more to our urban environments more than our rural environments. We have diverse communities. We really need to understand those communities and look at understanding not only their demographics but also their networks, their social capital, how we can work with those communities and build on it. And we also have our visitors from our urban areas into the rural areas and our international visitors to consider. So in terms of future priorities from working with wildfires and communities, certainly we believe that research and actions need to come across all natural hazards, so the importance of bringing wildfire into the discussion of other natural hazards as well as working within it in a specific role. And really the need to work in close collaboration with our key stakeholders, and this is both in designing our research and the actions right through to disseminating findings in a form that they can really understand in a summary forms. We need to work with communities, and this is obviously coming through in the Sendai framework too, but in terms of local relevant solutions, building on their networks, building on their social capital. Planning that is inclusive of communities and with community solutions. And matched with that, the point that I made earlier in terms of the focus on the rural-urban interface and the urban fringe. So, kia ora tātou, thank you.
I have to ask this question because, David, how do you frame a message to people when you're woken up at 4:35 a.m. and you're upstairs in your two-bedroom sort of townhouse and all your instincts tell you to get out of there, which is what I did in 10 feet, but I didn't injure myself. But I know that that's where most injuries occur, running out in front of broken glass.
I mean, I think you speak to the challenges of preparing people for rare events that they won't ever go through. So it's no easy answer to that. If you look at some other behaviours, we teach, and one of the answers is what we're doing. We have shakeout exercises. We teach children how to do it. We teach people on aeroplanes what to do with the chances they'll never have to do it. I don't think there's an easy answer to it, but we do need to, and that's why experiential learning, so those who've been through it, but in the absence of events, this practicing and continued messaging. So if we can get children at schools to do drop go hold for 15 years or 10 years while they're at school, maybe some of that will be intuitive response when an event occurs. I don't think, but you are also fighting human nature. An adult protecting their children is ingrained in us, or most of us, and I think that people will respond in ways that at the time they might think about, but they're also fighting human nature as well. So I don't think there's a, but I think we're totally different. If you look, and we haven't completed the analysis, but what we show, the survey data, we have less than 20% of people during the February 22nd earthquake drop covered in pearl. They followed the action. But we think a disproportionate children did it. So we're seeing there is some evidence to support the notion that there has been a payback from the investment in children education. And that's only in the last 10, 15 years we've been doing that. So one interesting observation, we did not have a single serious injury from any child at school in the 22nd of February. So globally we've got issues around dangerous children in schools. New Zealand can be very proud for, and there was a bit of luck in that because there were schools that things came down but they missed people. But we as a nation did not injure a single child seriously in any of our schools in Christchurch during the 22nd of February. So that does speak to some of the behaviours we have. Most of that is actually to do with the building stock, but human behaviour is important.
I'd like to ask a supplementary. You mentioned the significant gender differences in incidence of injury. I wondered, do you have the data on the differences in the kind of injury on a daily basis?
So, and there's a phase 2 of the work ongoing. We've got a current project working with the DHBs, University of Otago, Canterbury, Massey, and Accident Compensation to bring together the entire data set of all people who are injured and their treatment subsequent to look at both the cause of injury and long-term outcomes. That information, we're one of the few countries in the world that can do this research, and it will give us more insights. So there's probably more stories to come out of this as that work is worked through. The gender difference, we think it's actually people accessing healthcare because if people were equally exposed to injury-causing earthquakes, we would expect if 50% were male-female, if they equally sought health treatment, they would get even numbers. And we're seeing 70% more, so 1 to 1.7. So I think it's men don't go and ask for help, but who didn't know that?
Any more questions from the
David, you made a comment about the human condition. Would you like to say something about the study that you've just been part of about the optimistic bias, which I think is very pertinent?
Probably several studies, and John McClure may talk to this, and there are others involved. But I mean, in general, people see themselves as less likely to be impacted than someone else around them. So when we ask people, do you need to prepare for earthquakes? People say, yes, we do. And when you ask, are you likely to be less likely to be injured than someone else? Oh, but I'll be fine, but someone else should be doing it. So we tend to think we're optimistic. We're hardwired to be optimistic, actually. If we weren't, we'd have much higher incidence of depression and other negative things, because it's a pretty nasty world out there. So we're fighting human nature. We are, by all things being equal, humans are positive creatures. They see the world. Remember the days the sun shines more than the days that it rains, except in Wellington. So we're hardwired. So anyway, we're hardwired to be positive, and I think that is a natural coping mechanism, but it can counter against us, especially for rare and frequent events that are quite catastrophic. So there are a whole lot of human biases that we need to overcome, and I think that's, once again, the plug for understanding the social and behavioural sciences. It's not just a matter of transferring knowledge, it's about understanding how people make decisions with that knowledge, and we need to overcome some of these natural biases. Sorry, Stephen.
We're sunnier than Auckland.
That's why I left.
If you'd been in Wellington yesterday, you would have thought that Wellington had the best winter climate in the world.
And if there are no more questions, we can move on to the next panel. Thank you,